Shabbat Shalom. Imagine that you lived some 3,200 years ago and your parents had been slaves in Egypt. Your whole life you've spent wandering around in the Sinai desert, trying to avoid the snakes, always worried if there would be enough potable water to drink or enough of that sticky, gooey stuff everybody called manna to eat. And now you and 2 million of your closest relatives are standing on the border of the land that God himself has promised to y'all as a homeland. And you are standing on the eastern banks of the Jordan River, listening to the final parting sermons of this very old man named Moses, who has been your people's leader since before you were born. You can sense the excitement, the anticipation of entering this new land that everyone said was flowing with milk and honey. Imagine all the wonders you're going to enjoy. No more wandering, no more pitching tents and taking them down, no more wondering where you will put your head down for the night, no more of this awful diet of rock water and this sticky gooey stuff. And finally, you're going to be able to plant real crops and eat real fruits and vegetables and grains. God is going to bring bread out of the ground. You can raise animals for meat and milk. Think of the feasts, think of the banquets. And then, one day, that old man Moses starts to talk about animals in one of his sermons. Wait, what was that? Say that again. You mean we're not going to be able to eat everything that walks on the earth or slithers on the ground or frolics in the air or flutters in the water? I thought that snakes were going to be another kind of tube steak. For those of you who don't know, W.C. Fields called hot dogs tube steaks. If you don't know who W.C. Fields is, ask your grandparents. I wanted to eat peanut butter and jellyfish. Why can't I bring home the bacon? Some people around you are muttering that this must be some kind of a health food diet. We can eat low-fat cows, but not high-fat pigs. We have to salt our meat to preserve it from spoiling. But you're listening closely to this old man, and this is what the old man Moses was saying. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord has chosen you to be for him a treasured people from all the people on the face of the earth. You shall not eat anything abhorrent. This is about being a holy people, a treasured people. The Lord has taken you out of slavery in Egypt. Your parents spoke of the horrors of those days. The Lord has preserved you and guarded you for 40 years in the desert. Sure, you had to eat that weird, sticky, gooey manna stuff every morning, noon, and night, but you survived. There was nothing else you could have eaten. It's really a miracle that everybody's alive to this moment. And now you're going to be able to eat real food. Maybe you owe it to the Ribono Shel Olam, the master of the universe, to restrict your diet a little bit, given all that he has done for you. The Lord wants you to be his treasured people. Imagine that, out of all the people in the world. And all you have to do is follow this diet and the calendar of holidays and keep some other rituals and also be a really good person. But the diet. Okay, you say to yourself, so what are these restrictions exactly? What can I eat? And Moses continues to lay out the rules. There's 3 kinds of animals in the world: those that live on the land, those that live in the water, and those that fly in the air. The animals that live on land have to chew their cud, which means they have multiple stomachs to digest their food, and they have to have split hooves. Predatory animals with claws and sharp, pointy teeth are not permitted. No tube steaks of slithering snakes, and you can't bring home the bacon. Animals that live in the water have to have fins and scales, so no shellfish, no eels, and no jellyfish to go with your peanut butter. Also, no whales, no dolphins, and no porpoises. Animals that fly in the air, well, Moses gives a long list of forbidden birds. Many, but not all of them, are predatory. And finally, you're not allowed to boil a baby goat in its mother's milk. That was the scene in today's Torah portion. Now imagine that you are living some 3,000 years later. It's the 1870s, and you're living somewhere in the Midwest or the Wild West of the United States. And over the past 3,000 years, our people have developed the laws of keeping kosher a great deal. Your parents and grandparents moved to the United States to escape religious persecution in Europe. They had lived in Europe in ghettos, specifically designed for Jews, where the only food available was kosher. The neighborhood butcher was a shoichet, a kosher slaughterer. The local grocer carried only kosher food on his shelves. The baker used only dairy and vegetable oils, no lard or animal fat. You would have been crazy to even want to go out of the ghetto to buy some of that tray food that everybody else was eating. Why would you do such a thing? Why would you want to? But here in America, there were no ghettos, keeping Jews isolated. There was anti-Semitism, to be sure, but many Jews felt that perhaps anti-Semitism was inspired, at least in part, by our being so different. Maybe if we cut off the side curls of our hair, worshiped on Sundays instead of Saturdays, used English in our prayers instead of Hebrew, and ate the foods our neighbors were eating, we'd fit in better, and there'd be less prejudice against us. Besides, aren't these quaint Jewish customs outdated, old-fashioned, leftovers from an age long ago, before the Age of Enlightenment? These Jews wanted to be modern, sophisticated, thoroughly American. Some of your Jewish friends were doing just these things. They would have bacon with their eggs. They would enjoy shrimp cocktails and crab cakes. They would go to clam bakes and eat lobster. The world was their oyster, or at least their food would include oysters. And they did seem to fit in pretty well with other Americans. Your parents, though, continued to keep kosher, as did their friends. They were annoyed with these Jews who abandoned Jewish customs and traditions just to be more American or to feel more hip. And now you are 18, going on 19, and about to leave your parents' home and get married and build your own home. What are you going to do? This was the scene in which the conservative movement was born. So in 1875, the American Jewish community decided to establish its own rabbinical school. And in 1883, the first graduating class of Hebrew Union College celebrated with a fancy banquet. Many of you may have heard about it. Naturally, at such an occasion, you have to have such a banquet to celebrate, and the liberal end of this modern American Jewish world planned the banquet, which was to be held in a posh restaurant. The menu included an appetizer of little neck clams, non-kosher beef and mushrooms, soft-shell crabs, shrimp salad, sweetbreads, non-kosher chicken, frog's legs with cream sauce, not to mention ice cream and various cheeses for dessert. You can't make this up. That was literally the menu on the plates. Needless to say, the more traditional-minded reformers were highly offended by this menu. They got up from their tables and left the banquet. And 2 years later, the position of the liberal reformers was formalized in what they then called the Pittsburgh Platform of 1885, which expressly rejected kashrut as part of its interpretation of modern Judaism. These two developments, the Treifa Banquet and the Pittsburgh Platform, are specifically what drove the more traditional end of the reforming movement to break away and form their own movement, the conservative movement. And it was called conservative because the goal was to conserve Jewish traditions and rituals, even as it recognized the need for historical development and some change. I should add, by the way, that much has changed in the past 130 years. The Reform movement is now incorporating many rituals that are originally abandoned, including wearing head coverings, prayer shawls at services, more Hebrew in the prayers, and keeping some form of the dietary laws. But what would you have chosen to do if you lived in the 1880s in America? Would you have been with the more radical reformers, or would you have split from them and joined the conservative movement? The ironic fact is that today most conservative Jews do not keep kosher. But that does not mean, I don't think, that the conservative Jews no longer see keeping kosher as an ideal part of Jewish life. After all, they expect their rabbis to keep kosher. They expect their synagogue to keep kosher. We're not serving clam chowder at the reception in a few minutes, which hopefully will be in a few minutes. I hope nobody's disappointed about not having clam chowder today. Unlike the early Reform movement, we have always felt that keeping kosher is still relevant to Jews living in the modern world. Maybe it's more relevant than ever before. Limiting our diet of meat, we're subliminally recognizing the sanctity of life, even animal life. Excluding predatory animals from our diet, among others, we indicate our abhorrence to such violent behavior. Kosher means of slaughtering is considered to be relatively painless to the animal, and it also drains the blood, which we consider the life of the animal. And so therefore, by these means, we are celebrating all life, including animal life. Every time we choose to eat kosher food, and we eat several times a day, we're acknowledging all of these things, as well as our relationship with God. Finally, kashrut is an essential element that defines our people. You think about Italians, they eat Italian food, they speak the Italian language, they have a common language, a common history, and common literature. Jews also have a common language, Hebrew, a common literature, the Bible and commentaries, the Talmud. And we have a common history. We also have a common diet. Whether you live in Italy, Mexico, or Poland, we keep kosher. In short, kashrut is absolutely relevant today, perhaps more so today than in days gone by, when Jews knew they were Jews because they lived in ghettos and were not welcomed into the non-Jewish world. Now that we are welcomed into society, we need dietary laws to remind us of who we are. In our high-tech, fast-paced, and demanding world, where we buy packaged meat in the supermarket without having to think about the fact that an animal was killed so we can enjoy its meat, we need kashrut to remind us of the sanctity of life and to bring holiness into our lives. But if keeping kosher is still considered the ideal, why don't we find a greater observance among conservative Jews? My guess is that many conservative Jews don't keep kosher because they're daunted by what they perceive as the complexity of all the laws, and they feel restricted by the diet. Perhaps there's a particular food they can't give up, like shrimp or lobster or even McDonald's for some reason. For those Jews, perhaps one idea would be to start somewhere, anywhere. Cut out some non-kosher animals first, and then others, and then separate meat from dairy, and so on. Our movement actually has a 12-step plan for recovering treifaholics. Each month, you cut out another food or add another level of observance, and by the end of the year, in 12 months, you will find that you're keeping kosher and it all seems normal. Worked for me. I used to eat anything when I was a freshman in college. But my sophomore year, I had conservative Jews who kept kosher, and so I had to learn to buy only kosher meat, to separate meat and dairy in our kitchen, and so on. I still ate McDonald's out when I wanted to, but eventually I gave that up as well. Today, I follow a widely practiced compromise of kosher-observant conservative Jews. I keep strictly kosher at home, but I eat dairy and fish dishes out at restaurants, even if they're not supervised. If you've been thinking about keeping kosher, any of the rabbis here would be happy to discuss with you how you can go about doing that and setting up a kosher kitchen. As my colleague, Rabbi Samuel Dressner, Zichrono Livracha, used to say, other people engage in diets for their bodies. We have created a diet for the soul. If the first is understandable, why not the second? Shabbat Shalom.